case that never ends. Some crimes never end. They only change their disguise, hiding in dust and silence. I found an old case file buried deep in the archives. The paper reeked of mold, sharp and sour, like earth freshly dug from a grave. The first line I read made my blood run cold. A sickly gold gnawed into a patch of darkness, just enough to reveal the first painting of hell. Hell wasn't underground. It stood in the middle of a quiet Bavarian village, inside a weathered farmhouse called Hinterkaifeck. I closed my eyes, and the file in my hands turned into a door. When the door opened, I was no longer in the 21st century. I slid backward into the spring of 1922, when the Bavarian sky was still sharp and blue as crystal, when the fields rippled green and gold to the edge of the forest, and when death itself waited just beyond those crooked wooden walls. People like to remember villages through idyllic fragments: red-tiled roofs, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, children chasing geese under grape arbors, dogs barking their master's home. Hinterkaifeck had all of that. The morning sun poured honey over fields of oats. The church bell tolled across the meadows. Cows plodded calmly down the dirt lane. It looked like a scrap of heaven forgotten by the world. But just beneath that postcard calm, the truth waited like a knife sewn inside a pillow. And at sundown, heaven turned into a theater for darkness. A young policeman, barely out of school, had been summoned. He thought it was just another call, an old farmer late to market, maybe a stolen cart. He didn't know this would be the step that shackled itself to his memory for life. His heart hammered as he approached. The village slept in the late afternoon, but at the end of the dirt road, a crowd pressed around the farmhouse. They whispered, they pointed, some craned forward as though buying tickets for a carnival. In the air drifted a strange scent, iron tang of blood, damp hay, and the faint ash of a fire burned low. The young policeman pushed through. People parted, not from respect, but unease. A few farmers chuckled cruelly. "Let's see if the greenhorn has more guts than us." He said nothing, his jaw clenched. When he stepped into the yard, the lantern light from the cattle stall licked a wedge of darkness. And that was when he saw the image that would haunt him forever. Bodies. They lay heaped on the straw, twisted into shapes no living thing could hold. Dresses yanked askew, limbs bent like broken dolls. Hair clotted dark, the oil lamp shining it into tar-black streaks. Eyes wide, staring, frozen in accusation. A child still wrapped in a blanket, lips blue, as though life had been smothered mid-dream. The young officer stopped dead. His stomach knotted. He lurched to the corner and vomited. His breath stuttered, his eyes filled without consent. He tried to stand upright, but his knees locked, nailed to the floor. Outside, neighbors jostled at the doorway, hungry-eyed. They whispered guesses, leaned in, even laughed. An old woman hissed, "Sweet Lord, I've never," before being shoved aside. A young man smirked. Must be jealousy, or debt, or the devil himself. They didn't know, or worse, didn't care, that every boot they pressed into the straw, every hand brushing a chair, was erasing evidence forever. The village headman arrived, face pale, sweat slick on his temples. He refused to meet the gaze of the dead. Instead he barked, "Get them out. Nobody sees more than they should. Don't make a spectacle of this, do you hear?" The farmers obeyed. They dragged the bodies into the yard, dumped them on planks like sacks of spoiled grain. Blood striped the dirt like someone spilling ink. The young officer tried to protest. His throat locked. The headman's words fell like stones, heavy, absolute. And behind the crowd's shifting eyes he saw something worse than fear. He saw hunger. They weren't mourning. They were entertained. He backed against the wall, hands trembling as he pulled out his notebook. He had to record something, anything. But the page stayed white, his pencil scratching only crooked marks. His eyes darted, a blood-smeared ladle, a chair knocked askew, the attic door left ajar. Every detail screamed clue. But the noise pressed around him, shouts of "carry them out," the headman snarling "no fuss, no scandal." A wall of sound that smothered him. And in that moment, he understood. The case had already been murdered a second time. Not by the killer's hands, but by the village itself. I, reading the file a century later, felt the weight crush my chest. Justice hadn't failed because of time. It had been strangled here, in real time, under lantern light and boot soles. Every footprint, every breath of the killer was erased, not by dust, but by people who chose to look away. I turned another page. The paper was dry, but in my mind I could hear straw crunching, a child's cry dissolving into wind, and the frantic pulse of a young policeman, rooted in hell. The night at Hinterkaifeck began like this: a quaint village, a simple farmstead, torn open into history's scar. And instead of sewing it shut, they ripped it wider. The rookie officer stood trembling, cold sweat slicking his skin. At the academy, they'd taught procedure, cordon the scene, log witnesses, preserve evidence. But no textbook taught how to look into eyes that had been alive that morning. He dropped his pencil. The marks on the page looked like the handwriting of a drunk. The crowd buzzed louder, pressing like bees gone mad. One man bent close to a body, muttering, "Looks like demons did it." A child peeked through the boards, then burst into tears at the sight inside. The crying tangled with whispers, sneers, curses, an orchestra of chaos. The crime scene was no longer a crime scene. It was a marketplace. He wanted to shout, "Stop! Everyone out!" But the words died in his throat. The headman thundered, "No scandal. Drag them out. Bury them quick." His voice struck like a gavel, and the boy in uniform was no one to overrule him. He stepped back, heart hammering. That was when his eyes caught something the others missed: a faint mud smear on the attic stair. A shoe print, crooked, pressed fresh against the dust. Someone had been up there, recently. Maybe last night. The killer? He turned to point it out. But the headman was already ordering bodies hauled, barking, "Make it tidy. The fewer who know, the better." The young cop looked back at the stair. The muddy print waited, silent, begging to be heard. But the straw was already trampled. The furniture shifted, the dead carried out. The scene was dissolving by the minute. He felt like he stood on quicksand. The harder he tried to hold on, the faster it slipped. And then the thought hit: what if the killer is still up there? What if, right now, someone was holding their breath, watching? A shiver raced up his spine. He tilted his head toward the darkness above. All he saw was a black hole, gaping. His back went cold. His breath came short. For an instant, he almost ran, but his feet refused. Then a draft stirred the door. The attic hatch knocked against the wall with a dull clunk. He flinched. The villagers roared with laughter. The rookie spooked by ghosts. His cheeks burned. Shame and despair knotted inside him. In the yard, a man snapped, "If this spreads, no one will buy here. No one will marry here. Better to bury fast, cover it up. The devil fades if you starve him." The headman nodded grimly. "The village must keep its face. We will not be shamed." Face. Reputation. Two words that fell on the young officer's head like a verdict. At the academy, they'd preached that the law was supreme. But here, on this farm of blood and straw, power belonged to fear and to men guarding their pride. He inhaled, choking on iron and hay. In that moment, he knew the case would never be solved if this madness held. And he, alone, would be the only witness to remember the print on the stair. But what weight does one rookie's memory carry against an entire village bent on forgetting? And I, reading now, 100 years later, could see him as if standing in front of me. His trembling, his helplessness, his eyes locked on the attic, full of questions that would never be answered. Because in that very moment, the crime scene had already died. Not at the killer's hand, but at the hands of those who chose silence. The bodies were carried out like livestock, stripped of their dignity, paraded before neighbors whose whispers grew more lurid with every step. One boy murmured that he'd seen a shadow pacing the roof nights before. An old woman swore she'd heard hammering in the barn long past midnight, though she quickly bit her tongue when others glared. And then there was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor. He slipped through the crowd without waiting for permission, walked straight into the house, and opened the front door with a key he should not have had. The young policeman froze. Why would a neighbor carry the family's key? Lorenz's expression betrayed nothing, but the fact alone planted a thorn that would never leave the file. In the kitchen, a bowl of porridge still sat half-eaten on the table. Beside it, a slice of bread missing a bite, the crust hardened overnight. On a chair nearby, the cushion sagged as though someone had sat there long after the murders. The killer hadn't just killed, they had lingered, slept in the beds, ate their food, fed their animals. The horror wasn't only in the violence. It was in the silence after, where life went on in that house, as if the dead weren't lying a few feet away. The rookie officer wanted to shout, to demand answers, to order the crowd out and seal the house. But the headman's orders had already sealed his tongue, and the villagers, with their mutters of demons and deaths, weren't searching for justice. They were searching for a story that excused their fear. The attic door creaked again, swinging gently in the draft. The muddy footprint gleamed dull in the lantern light. The boy in uniform gripped his notebook harder, forcing himself to scratch one jagged line onto the page. Stair, print attic. His hand trembled so badly that the words bled into each other. By the time the last body hit the planks outside, the evidence was gone. Straw churned. Furniture moved. Voices drowned out the silence where answers might have been. That was Hinterkaifeck, March 1922. A village that looked like heaven by day and reeked of hell by night. A farmstead where 6 lives ended violently, and where the truth itself was dragged into the yard and left to bleed with them. And justice? Justice never even set foot inside. The first night's report. The oil lamp guttered in the cramped duty room, its sickly yellow light crawling over a blotched plaster wall and casting crooked shadows that looked like they were smirking. The young policeman sat alone at the wooden table, hands still shaking, his coat sour with the baked smell of singed straw and dried blood. In front of him lay the report ledger, first page blank, waiting for lines that would decide the fate of a case, or, more precisely, would decide how people chose to remember it. Outside, wind scraped through the door seam, carrying the last scraps of the afternoon's chaos. Villagers whispering, a dog's broken howls, the headman's voice rasping orders to bury fast, hush fast, keep it neat. But inside the young officer's skull, something thudded louder than all of it, the muddy smudge on the attic step. It refused to go away. Every time he shut his eyes, it returned and whispered, I am the truth. Are you going to write me down or not? He lifted the pencil, the tip kissed paper. What came first? At the academy, they taught a formula: date, time, place, parties involved. Could that cold scaffolding hold the stink he had just breathed? He wrote, on the day of 1922, at the Hinterkaifeck farmstead, the bodies were discovered. His hand shook, letters breaking into crooked furrows. He stopped. Bodies. The word froze his fingers. These were not generic remains. That was a father's crushed face. That was a mother's eyes stuck wide, glassy with accusation. That was a child's small form, the color gone from him as if sleep had been strangled at the throat. And all he could set down for them was bodies. He dropped the pencil and covered his face. The afternoon's film unspooled. Men dragging the dead like sacks of chaff. Children tittering at the way blood pooled like ink. The headman barking, don't make a fuss. The crime scene had become a sideshow where death wasn't a tragedy, but a prop people used to swerve responsibility and protect the village's good name. He remembered a woman screaming, put them away, or the spirits will haunt us. The crowd seized on that line like a permit to bury the truth. And he, only officer on scene, had been swallowed whole by that cowardice. He forced the ledger open again and wrote fast, skipping detail on purpose. Cause of death, multiple blows. No specific suspect identified. Villagers have not provided reliable information. The line lay there, bloodless. The attic mud print. His pencil paused. To include it was to defy the headman. To include it meant that tomorrow he would have to climb those steps and prove it out. But what if he was wrong? What if it was old? The entire village would laugh. A rookie with a shaky badge has no margin for error. I, reading this nearly a century later, wanted to shout into his ear, write it down. It's a key, a thread people will still be tugging 100 years from now. But I was only a shadow at his shoulder, watching the pencil skitter past the very spot it should have stopped. A bright blank opened, wide enough to hurt the eye. That blank was the first dash, the start of a long chain of omissions. He stepped out to the stoop. The night was thick, the moon smothered by cloud. Only wind and tree voice. From far away came a regular knocking. Could have been a millstone, could have been someone hammering a loose board. But his ear, wound tight as a wire, heard it as something else. Hammer taps echoing from the farm, echoing from cracked skulls. He clutched his head and trembled. He had never felt so small. Here he was, a policeman, and yet afraid of the dark, of the wind, even of the pencil in his hand. He went back to the table and forced himself to add, cause of death, likely a blunt tool, possibly an axe or mattock. Time of death, Estimated during the night, he stopped. The pencil slid from his fingers. What if the killer was still nearby? What if the killer could read each line he wrote and grin in the dark? The thought iced his back. He snapped toward the window. A tree's shadow lay long across the yard, the silhouette almost human, someone standing perfectly still, watching. He laughed once, dry and wrong. I'm losing it. He wasn't. He had simply stepped into a place where hell wasn't underground. It was bound up right here in the ledger, in every blank he left untouched. He never slept. Each time the oil flame swayed, the wall shadow changed shape, broad-shouldered, then hunched, then bent over as if peering down from the attic hatch. At the far edge of the table, the ledger gaped open, the empty, white, demanding confession. He didn't write. He'd learned something brutal, that here, truth didn't live in paperwork. It was trapped inside fear, inside face, inside the unblinking stares of the living. From where I sit, I know. That night a young policeman helped bury Hinterkaifeck for the first time. The murderer only had to kill 6 people. The living and the rookie did the rest. Dawn came colorless, the tin light of early spring. The village wore the look of a face rinsed after a long night, but the air still tasted of iron and smolder. The young officer stepped into the yard, eyes dark-rimmed from a sleepless vigil. He hadn't touched the cold coffee on his desk when he saw a knot of villagers at the station gate, carrying shovels, shrouds, and a common purpose heavy as lead. The headman led them, face pale and set like a gravestone. We can't leave the dead lying there. We'll bring them out and bury them for now. The village can't endure the stench another day. Then to the officer, you just sign. Don't complicate things. His stomach turned. Sign meant ratifying every order the headman had just delivered, accepting that 6 bodies would be hauled away from the scene while any surviving trace was still there to be read. He saw the attic mud print in his mind. He saw the claw marks on the barn door. If they shoveled it all into the ground, he'd have nothing left to hold on to. He hurried to block the gate. Stop. We haven't photographed the scene, haven't measured anything. Don't move them. Don't bring them out. His voice pitched high with panic, a cracked trumpet in a funeral march. The villagers didn't listen. 2 men had already lifted the first bodies onto planks and laid them on the yard, pulling sheets over them. Blood printed the dirt in ragged stains that dried in the cold. He lunged to pull them back. A work-hardened forearm thudded across his chest. The headman's gray eyes were iron. You're young. You don't understand. The dead must be buried. Keep them here, and the village suffers. The words fell like mallet blows. He felt himself shrink. 100 eyes stared at him, not one on his side. They wanted peace. They wanted to close this case like shutting a warped door. And he, an outsider, a badge fresh from the academy, was a droplet of ink in a barrel of well water. He tried once more. If we rush this, the killer will still be out there. Aren't you afraid? No one answered. Someone snorted. Someone muttered. Killer or spirits, it's all the same, so long as they leave us alone. They kept at it, bodies dragged, traces erased, shovels cutting tidy holes where answers used to lie. The young officer stood rooted, chest hammering, vision blurring. He heard a scream, but it wasn't the dead. It was his conscience being snapped like a stick. By noon, everything was tidy. The yard looked clean in the most frightening way. The headman shoved a sheaf of papers at him, voice flat. Sign. Report. Cause of death. Unknown assailant. Note that the villagers assisted. His hand shook so hard the graphite skated. He signed. In that instant he knew he had betrayed his instinct and justice. He also knew he couldn't take on an entire village alone. That night, back in the duty room, he stared at the ledger. The first page still had that blank, where the attic print should have been. It glowed in his eyes, white and sharp. He lifted his hand to add it and stopped. Tomorrow, when the formal report went in, no one would want more details. So a living clue died right there on the page. Even now that line chills me. Because that very night, Hinterkaifeck lost its first real chance. The murderer had no need to flee. He only had to sit still and let the living clean up his work. They did it with speed and a terrible conviction. In the thick dark, the young officer hunched over, shoulders quivering. He didn't sob aloud, but I knew, somewhere inside, he was crying for a truth just buried alive. I turned the old diary in my hands. The leather had flaked to scales like a dead fish. When I opened it, the paper creaked like brittle bone. The ink had bled into smoky halos, not unlike dried blood. Some lines faded to mere ridges, like the last breath smeared by the wind. It wasn't a neat book anymore. It had been handled and rehandled, jammed under a hand that trembled from lost faith. Pages had been torn, top halves gone, leaving sentences dangling like aborted confessions. Other sheets stuck together, and when they were pulled apart, the ink ghosted across, welding two separate days into one warped lump of time. I was still staring at the last line of the night, where the young policeman sat folded in on himself, shoulders bucking like a man about to cry, when a single turn of the page catapulted me into the chaos of morning. No period, no clean break, just a ragged tear at the edge, like time itself had been ripped and shoved me from blackness into glare. That was when I understood. Even the diary carried the disorder its owner had lived through. Night and day, panic and composure, tears and handwriting. Everything lay over everything else. I wasn't reading a journal anymore. I was walking through a scrambled memory where time didn't flow straight. It broke and leapt. So instead of lingering with the night, I was swept into the morning, the opposite of peaceful. A crowd, loud and sticky with rumor, curious hands peeling back shrouds. The headman issued orders as if he were arranging a market stall. The jolt wasn't a flaw in storytelling. It was a hole inside the young officer's mind, pressed into the paper and left to crack. I moved at his back, a shadow with no body, a companion from another century. The village wore its daytime face, pitched roofs quiet as held breath, late smoke corkscrewing off chimneys, hens fussing in straw. In the middle of that still life, the farm sat like a bruise on a clean cheek. Neighbors ringed it like water around a stone, whispers clotted in mud, and a yard scuffed until the scene looked like an overfixed photograph. The rookie hurried, breath chopping, his palms slick on the damp notebook. Last night had been the first hammer blow. Today brought the second. People. The headman stood aside, heavy cloak slumped over his shoulders, voice low but steely. He calmed folks with words like steady, leave it be, we have children to feed, as if reciting a charm. But every leave it be was permission for another hand to reach into the scene. Big-shouldered farm hands helped by moving stakes to open a path. Two widows helped by collecting torn fabric so it won't get filthy. Children had been sent home, but they hovered behind skirts, wide-eyed, heels scraping fresh grooves into the floor of straw. I watched every motion, listened to the set creak like late winter ice. Last night, the killer took the first cut. This morning, 100 innocent hands finished the job, erasing the answers night had left behind. The young officer tried to rebuild a perimeter with the only tool he had left, his voice. He laid words down like river rock and hoped the current would bend. But his voice was green, and the wind in that yard was strong. Please step back. Please don't touch. Every please conceded ground. Every don't was twine in a flood. The headman turned, smiled kindly. Do your work. The village knows its limits. The smile slid over the rookie's face like a sheet of ice. I watched his throat work once and stall. Someone produced a camera, not from the constabulary, but the wedding photographer. A wooden box, round lens, iron legs, a black hood to swallow the head. He arrived with a little strut. Big tragedies pay better than nuptials. He opened a valise, glass plates, chemical bath, paper as pale as bakery bread. The rookie brightened. The scene might be fixed, not just inside his shaking memory. But the camera spoke a stubborn language, slow and fussy. Set the legs, turn the barrel, frame, meter. Light didn't care. Clouds dragged in swatches. Wind puffed grid at the lens. Bodies crossed the frame without warning. Don't walk through. Please. The photographer ducked under the hood and became a bent phantom. Under the cloth he murmured, stand still a few seconds. A few seconds. Those seconds stretched like half a lifetime because no one there understood how rare stand still really is. The first plate smeared. He lifted it, hissed. Wind. The second caught a stranger's arm half into frame, suspended like a ghost. The third, he snapped as someone coughed hard enough to rattle the tripod. The rookie scrambled, blocking bodies, mumbling procedures, failing all of it. The headman patted his shoulder. Take a few for the record. We've got to lay them out. Daylight's going. The phrase for the record stuck in the rookie's eye like a needle. The stock pen was messier than last night. Straw churned, roof drip cut new streams. footprints layered like lily pads. In that fickle light, the angled slide he'd noted at midnight had dulled to nothing, like a sentence overwritten by a heavy hand. He crouched to examine it. Just then a squat, barrel-chested neighbor muscled in. "I've known this place since the old man's father," he began, story sloshing out thick as dregs. While he talked, his hobnailed boot bit the margin of the mark. Just a little, but enough to shear the only sharp edge left. I watched the rookie's spine twitch. He turned, mouth opening on a scold, and shut it. That act of restraint weighed more than a shout. It was the endurance of a man who knows his authority is thin as damp paper. At the kitchen, the black pot that had still breathed heat in the night was cold, its ring on the table grain already fading like words written in water. A wooden ladle had sat at a particular odd angle, the angle I'd clocked, but someone had fixed it, placing it neatly in a basin. He stepped in, hunting time itself, only to realize time had again outrun him. On the sill, a clean streak at eye level, where someone had leaned to look out, now had a second, fresher streak stenciled over it, bigger, tidier. Someone had stood there that morning in the exact spot, repeating the same posture as the person from the night. A terrifying echo, time photographing time, laying one print over the other. "You'll need to hurry," the headman said behind him, a hand on the young man's nape without quite touching. "We still must call the priest." His eyes slid around the kitchen and he sniffed. "Look at these dishes. Filthy." A helpful woman lifted the very ladle. "Let me wash that," and set it somewhere else for the third time in 10 minutes. The rookie went rigid. Helplessness climbed from his throat to his temples like fever. Everything kept moving while he tried to nail it in place. I heard the half-snarl rattle up from his chest and collapse back into a hard exhale. "Photograph the stove first," he said, grasping at order. The photographer knelt to brace the legs. The kitchen was worse than the yard. Dim, gold, spotty, dust drifting like fog. The plate might etch in the grain of the wood, but it would never capture the smell of fat baked deep, the little tremor of a pot that had once breathed, or the way a living hand had cupped a bowl like it belonged there. Cameras are diligent creatures, but blind to motive. They eat light, and here, light was a traitor. The whispering shifted territories, porch to kitchen to barn to yard. Every so often a flat, wrong laugh popped like a cork, a sound people shoot out because they don't want to cry. An old man helped by opening a window for more light. A wind gust leapt in and dragged a lace of ash across the tabletop, frosting every edge the rookie had just learned by eye. That dusting was a kind of bandage, made the wound look cleaner, hid the torn flesh underneath. He learned a cruel axiom before the bells tolled noon. The killer hadn't needed to wipe the scene. The town would do it for him. They erased by pity, by curiosity, by help, by the need to move the dead to decent places. They had their logic. Who doesn't want the bodies of neighbors treated gently? But their logic collided with another. Truth must be preserved intact before burial. The rookie flailed in the churn of those two currents like a beginner tossed by undertow. The photographer's helper, a nervous lad, rattled around with a box of plates. "Should I shoot the boot marks in the mud?" "Yes," the rookie blurted, grateful for anything concrete. The boy swung the gear closer and stepped right into the print. "Hey, too late." His own fresh circle stamped over the needle-thin older track. I saw something go hazy in the rookie's eyes, like a small object dropped in water. A woman came with folded shrouds. "The priest sent these." The sentence shattered in the air and fell into the kitchen like salt. The rookie spun. "Wait. Please wait until I finish the positions." The headman's hand landed on his shoulder again, not hard, almost paternal. "You're young. You don't yet know. In this village, the dead are owed the right. Don't make a scene." A scene. As if truth were the disturbance and the killings weren't. The word sugared a decision. Let the water run as it always had, into the familiar ditch. Let incense rise. Let questions settle like silt. He took his hand off the notebook. Small motion, loud sound. The cover clapped wood with a little tick that felt like something giving way. A hairline crack opened inside him. On one lip stood "dig deeper." On the other, "leave it be." That crack would widen for years unless something bridged it. I stood beside him, knowing the rock would roll and being no help at all. By late afternoon, the light had gone thin and pewter. The plates, glass fish laid out to dry, stacked on the porch table. Every one of them wrong in a different way. Blown out, blurred, with a stranger's limb at the edge or a skid of smoke across the frame. The photographer scratched at his neck. "Hi, I'll try to develop them clear." The rookie nodded, forcing something like a smile. He'd learned a survival trick in a day. Lie to yourself just enough to keep going. At the yard's corner, two men argued confidently about who did it, in the tone of people who haven't seen a thing. "Must have been a stranger," one declared. "Right. No one local would do that." The line, "no one local," rolled downhill like a boulder, blocking every path that led back toward the attic. I knew a body had lain up there for nights. The crowd preferred walls, us on one side, outsider on the other. Those walls make breathing easier. Those walls also clamp every hard question shut. A clatter of wheels, then the priest, tall and black as a spilled line of ink. The headman hurried to greet him. The yard shifted its beat, ritual time. The rookie stepped back, closed his ledger, and gave the aisle to the sacrament. That was the first time he felt investigation at one end of a rope and funeral at the other, yanking opposite directions. Near dusk, the kitchen ash that had obsessed me all day was swiped aside by the woman with the shrouds, revealing a thin, straight groove across the floor. Something long had been dragged there. Had he arrived 5 minutes earlier, he might have pointed and written. Movement of weapon, taken or hidden. Now it was a mark touched by the living. I bent and tucked it into my own memory, since no one else could hold it. The invisible companion had become the last camera. Back in the barn, he hunted for any remaining edge under the new trampling. He crouched and crawled, eyelashes full of grit. For a moment, a point glinted. He reached, just as a pale-faced girl backstepped in fear and planted her heel on it. She burst into tears, hands folded in apology. He nodded. "It's all right." And it was, "It's all right," had become the bomb people smear on failure. The camera finally caught a few frames. A kitchen corner veined by slant light. A section of stall wall pocked with a round dent. A wide yard riddled with dragged lines. I looked and knew. Someday these would be the photographic record. People would argue over them, draw straight lines through blurry points. So much detective work is trying to read letters on wet paper. The boldest letters of day one are always the ones we stepped on. By sundown, he slumped on the porch step, spine against the post, opening and closing his fist as if trying to catch what kept slipping. The photographer packed his kit, promised to bring prints tomorrow. The headman came one more time, hand on the shoulder again. "You did well. Leave the rest to the village." Praise goes on like a fresh coat of lime. Brightens for passers-by, doesn't heal the crack. He opened the ledger and scratched an honest line. Seemed disturbed. He stabbed the period so hard it punctured the paper. He wrote, "Lacking," and stalled. Lacking what? Rope and stakes? Manpower? Authority? All of it. He shut the book and leaned on it to keep the page from springing. When he looked up, his eyes lifted, again, to the attic space. Not a room, but a vantage, where a watcher would have watched. I could hear the question he couldn't voice. He was there last night. Who holds his breath today? The wind didn't answer. It only shouldered a damp straw smell past his face, carrying the last warmth of a stove gone cold. A group of men hefted planks toward the gate, ready to carry the dead to the church. They walked in a line, eyes lowered. The widows murmured about tomorrow's meals for other families, as if life itself were hopping over a hole in the ground, refusing to look down. The rookie stepped aside, cap in hand, watching them pass. I stood with him and heard his pulse slow, not because fear eased, but because exhaustion took its place. When the yard finally emptied and the sky went to raw lead, he circled to the kitchen one last time, the day's last stubbornness. On the table, where the pot's broken rim had once stamped a neat circle, a fresh water ring had formed, a lopsided halo left by the priest's cup during the blessing. The new ring sat on top of the old. Day laid overnight. He touched the wet edge with a fingertip, the gesture of a man testing a scab. Somewhere inside him a sound rose. Half, yes, half surrender. At the gate his boots sank, held an extra beat. He turned back and looked up to the dark attic one more time. I whispered something he didn't know yet. From here on, the case had a new shape. It wouldn't just be a hunt for the one with the hammer. It would be a fight with an invisible machine called Helpful Chaos. It kills truth with clean hands, and it would prove a more stubborn enemy than any man holding a mattock. On the road back to the station, he said nothing, ledger under his arm. The photographer's gear clacked behind them. Wind slapped his coat and made the buttons chatter. I studied his face in profile, still boyish, already sanded down a layer by the day. Last night, he learned to fear death. Today, he met a new terror, the way the living make death mute. Those two fears would walk beside him, silvering his hair early, snagging his sleep on a phantom creek without a roof. At the desk, he set the ledger down, opened it, hovered. A line appeared in his own hand that read like someone else's. First day, couldn't keep it. He laid his palm over half the sentence, as if to hide it from himself. He slid his hand away and added a single word, yet. The sentence became, first day, couldn't keep it yet. The difference of one word is the weight of a lifetime of stubbornness. I backed away from the table until the station's yellow light pulled me into shadow. Outside, the wind scribbled nonsense into dust. In my ear, the day made its braid. The cameras click. The woman's let me wash that. The headman's don't make a scene. The rookie's please don't touch. All of it stacked into a bad chord, a chorus always off the beat. And under it, one drawn low note. The addict's breath, the one thing no one had laid a hand on, and the thing that would cling to him for years. Tomorrow they'd return. The camera would spit out chalky prints, just clear enough for people to argue in the village's little council hall. He'd learn to talk less and look more, to set his pencil slower and ask his questions faster. No matter how much he learned, though, this day had carved a channel in his memory, the runnel where evidence is blurred by the good intentions of the living. That channel would steer him, in this case, around the tight lips of a community for a very long time. I, the invisible companion, wrote one private line for myself before the dark took me. A second killer has arrived, the crowd. And from now on, if we ever wanted to find the man with the hammer, we'd first have to learn how to walk through 1,000 empty, well-meaning hands. The burial in shadows. I turned another page. The old notebook no longer had an order to it. Ink bled through, lines blurred over other lines. Beginnings and endings sat on top of each other like bones tumbled in a pit. Whole corners were missing, sentences sheared in half. And then, without warning, a torn leaf would fling me straight into the next morning. Time inside the book didn't flow, it lurched. It felt like the young officer's mind itself, splintered, frantic, ungraspable. And as I read those scraps, I was yanked out of the night's suffocation into a cold morning where the light didn't banish shadow, so much as spotlight what everyone meant to hide. Fog had lacquered the village. A rooster's call stuttered and died. The church bell hurried through a thin peal, and the dirt lane to Hinterkaifeck was already clogged. They gathered as if for a fair, shoulder to shoulder, faces wearing a muddle of curiosity and fear and, disturbingly, a thrum of excitement. They leaned in, traded stories that had fattened overnight. Each retelling swelled the truth into something grotesque. I walked at the young policeman's back and felt his steps tremble, his breath stitch itself short. Last night, shock came from meat and blood. Today, it came from the living. The scene was trampled to tatters. Boot marks braided with footprints no one would own. Curious hands had palmed everything. The table, the stall door, even the attic hatch. A small boy squealed with delight before his mother yanked him away. He'd found a bloody splinter of wood. To him, it was a prize. To the women, it was a pageant, a chance to whisper and point. To the men, it was a fresh spice for tonight's tavern talk, taken with the tight-lipped wince of people who claimed disgust and secretly savor the telling. Inside the circle, for bodies had already been dragged from the stall and plopped in the yard. Limbs locked into crooked angles, draped in ragged cloths. No chalk lines, no markers. Every border had been scuffed out by village hands. The young officer froze, eyes wide, notebook slick with sweat. He wanted to shout, to shove everyone back, to keep what was left of the story intact, but his voice broke against the wall of them. A stranger with a soft badge doesn't command a village. Then the headman stepped forward, a thick-waisted man in a heavy coat, voice like a hammer. Enough. Out to the field. Bury them. We won't live with this stink one more day. The crowd answered with a thrumming murmur, then 100 little mms. Everyone was hungry for an ending. No one wanted to be locked in the question, who did this? They chose the simple road. Bury everything. fear, truth, the lot. The priest appeared, vestments gray with wear, cross in his hand. He stood over the bodies and muttered prayers, then nodded to the headman. Take them, let them rest. Keep the little ones away. His words felt like a sanction from higher ground. But to me they told like a sentence, truth to be interred alive. The young officer moved to block them. I watched his lips tremble. We need to record, preserve the scene. We can't. His protest thinned in the wind and the whispering, and most of all, in the headman's bark. You're a rookie. We know what's best for our people. Two heavy men hooked him by the shoulders and eased him aside. He stumbled, nearly went down. The notebook slipped from his fingers into mud. The page drank a brown smear, letters bleeding out as if justice itself had been thumbed away by blunt hands. They hoisted the dead, for shapes layered, cloths dirtying against the wet ground. The crowd's soft groans weren't for the murdered. They were for the inconvenience, the smell, the fear, the thought of having to carry this in their heads. They wanted it shoveled under the same way people bury garbage. Death wasn't tragedy here, it was a burden. The priest fell in behind the planks, intoning. The words didn't erase the blood on the yard. They pressed it down into a cold bruise. The young officer stood rigid, shoulders shivering. He wasn't enforcing law. He was a spectator at a cruel play. I stood beside him and felt the tremor pass from him into me, not from cold, but from panic catching fire. That was when I understood. Brutality didn't live only in the killer. It lived in the jostling crowd, in the headman's command, in a prayer that could veil stains while leaving them unexamined. The murderer killed the people. The village, with its urgency and hush, killed the case. The ring parted, the scuff and drag of boards mixing with the hiss of settling soil. The young officer rooted in place, notebook pressed to his chest like a useless shield. His eyes locked on the procession. His nose flared. His mouth worked without a sound. He wanted to order the world to stop, to freeze the slicing and dragging and lifting until a pencil could catch up. But the village's noise swallowed every word before it formed. The headman strode at the fore, stabbing his finger and flinging orders. He didn't look at the dead as neighbors. He looked at them the way you look at obstacles you intend to clear. The priest kept pace, cross-bobbing, his prayers like a long cloth thrown over the ground to cover whatever lay underneath. Broad-shouldered men grunted, dragging the boards. The boards grated the earth, keening a long, chalky scrape, leaving a smear of dark like ink yanked by a careless hand. The women followed, mouths moving in whispered pieties, but their eyes were bright, greedy for each new drop that fell. The smell hit, a cold tang threaded with wet dirt. It wasn't only corpses. It was the odor of truth being hauled away a yard at a time from the place it belonged. The young officer dropped to a knee and clawed at the soil. The dirt was slick and chill, but his palm was wetter with sweat. He knew that once those bodies went under, the case wouldn't be sealed with earth alone. Silence would be the real lid. A knot of kids ghosted after the procession. They giggled and toe-punted clots of bloody loam the way they'd kick marbles. One boy crowed when he palmed a cracked chip streaked red. His mother snatched it back and slapped his hand, softly, and then, just as softly, held the shard a heartbeat longer than she should, looking at it as if it answered some private itch. The horror here wasn't the gore. It was the way people treated it like a game. On the lane to the fields, rumors clattered like loose stones. One man named a former hired hand. Another jerked his chin toward a rival farm. A third shook his head and said, "Devils." Whatever the theory, they sang it in the same key, detachment. The scarier the truth, the faster they wanted it buried. I walked with the young officer and saw a rim of red in his eyes. Each laugh in the group, each tossed-off guess, cut him like a paper edge. He swallowed, and the swallow stuck. For a moment, he turned toward the house. Today's wrecked rooms superimposed over last night's blood work, like a man about to run back in and hug the place to him, to keep its spirit from being peeled away. He didn't move. He only cinched the notebook tighter to his sternum and shook like a child lost in a crowd. The field on the village's fringe waited with holes already shoveled. The earth was fresh, wet, mouths agape. The men dropped the bodies and they thumped, a dry, final sound. The priest raised the cross and lifted his chant to drown the scrape of spades. The headman clapped briskly, faster, lights going. Don't have the wolves come in. The way he said wolves chilled me. In this place, wild animals drew more fear than whoever carried the hammer. The young officer didn't go near, didn't turn away. He stood mid-distance, eyes stretched wide, watching each shovel spill. Dirt didn't just cover the dead. It blanketed any chance left to read the ground. Dusk thinned the faces. His was the color of old paper. He clenched his mouth. I could hear his heartbeat in his breath, punching hard as if it wanted out. That moment sowed a seed, not only of a massacre, but of a life to be spent underneath the weight of having watched justice lowered into a hole while he couldn't stop it. They worked quickly, men with the rhythm of harvest. Only this wasn't graying. Soil slid, thudded, tamped. A woman knelt to cross herself, and her ribbons slipped free, bright, braided, the wrong color for any guild or church day here. It lay in the mud, a small stripe of foreignness. The officer saw it, recognized the knot. Not how the village women tie, but a tighter sailor's bind he'd seen once on a river team. He took a step, a heel stamped down, a neighbor's, pressing the ribbon into muck until it vanished like a word bitten off. The neighbor didn't notice, or pretended not to. The men trudged back to the lane to fetch the last board. The cart wheel sank near the smokehouse and hit a patch that sounded hollow when they levered a plank free. Thunk, as if the soil beneath had been turned and tamped very recently. The officer cocked his head at the sound. The headman barked at the driver to mind the rut, and the hollow note disappeared under ruts and scolds. On the priest's book, a page fluttered and the gold-edged numbers for memorial masses flashed. Later, someone would squint at the registry and wonder why 2 entries bore the same sponsor name but opposite signatures. Not today. Today the book shut with a respectable smack and the cross led the way out. A woman offered a shawl to lay over the smallest form. When she tugged it free of a hedge, a strand of long hair clung to the wool, coarser and darker than hers. She frowned at it and plucked it away with thumb and forefinger, then wiped her fingers on the grass as if the grass could absolve her of curiosity. The officer lifted his chin to mark which hedge. 2 boys barreled through the gap, chasing each other, and the little clue broke under their boots with a wet thread snap. He looked back along the lane. A dog refused to pass a fence post near the orchard. It bristled and whined at it the way animals do at scents they know too well. Its owner jerked the lead hard and crooned. None of that. The priest lifted his voice again. The dog dropped its gaze and followed, as if piety could train a nose not to notice. At the edge of the field, the headman took off his hat. We'll say we did what was right. He didn't say, we did what was needed to keep the place calm. But that was what stood between every line. The priest blessed the freshly mounded loam. People crossed themselves. As they turned, the headman's eyes drifted to the young officer with the disinterest a manager gives a junior who slowed the job. The officer's knuckles were white around the notebook. On the walk back, the murmur swelled again. A rumor bucked up. Someone had a key. Someone had been seen going in like it was his kitchen. The young officer's head flicked, instinct snapping toward that string of words. Then a laugh cut it. Old wives' nonsense. And the tale changed shape mid-syllable, dissipating into a safer story about demon footprints that never have to stand against a ledger. By the gate the village seemed to breathe out. Work done. Smell managed. The headman climbed a stone and said, "Go home. Pray for them. Keep your doors latched. Talk no further." The last sentence carried a soft steel. It was a prayer phrased as policy and a policy phrased as prayer. People nodded because nodding is easier than thinking. The young officer lagged. He stooped and picked up his fallen notebook, now mottled with dried mud. He thumbed the smeared page, not to clean it, but to feel the stubborn grit under his skin. I watched him lift his gaze to the farmhouse attic. From here, in flat evening, the hatch was a black tooth. He held it with his eyes as if keeping it in place could stop time from slipping any further. Behind us, the church bell spoke once, then twice. In the thin space after the second ring, he heard it again. That hollow timber near the smokehouse, the thunk of earth over something that wasn't earth. He opened his mouth, closed it. If he called them back now, the headman would paint him as a ghoul, a man who wouldn't let the dead lie. If he kept quiet, the sound would live in his ear forever. He swallowed it like a pill that stuck halfway down. He followed the priest back to the yard because he had to. The women swept the kitchen, good women. Their brooms erased the last of the ash lines that might have been read as a map. One of them, wanting to do things right, straightened a crooked picture of a saint, and set it square. The nail had scratched the wall on its way up. A diagonal little mark. The kind of mark a handwriting expert could have compared later to another diagonal, on a stall post, say. All gone, for tidiness. The photographer arrived late, breathless, and set his corner boys to mixing the first bath. He raised a plate to the yard's new smoothness and captured nothing but the hush the village preferred. He would bring the prince tomorrow, pale and argumentative, the kind that people will fight over for years. None of them would show the ribbon, the hollow ground, the hair, the dog at the post. Truth never thinks of the camera at the right time. As the light died and the bodies lay under new earth, the village did what villages do. It made the day into a story it could stand to tell. The headman was efficient. The priest was consoling. The men were stalwart. The women were devout. The children were warned. And the young officer, who had seen the attic step and the hitch in the dog's lead, and the small wrongnesses people carry like lint, he stood between their story and his eyes, and he felt himself pulled toward the easier one, because to live here he might have to. He didn't cry. He had run out of tears in the duty room. He just set his jaw until the muscle jumped and wrote one line before the fog took the ink. Buried under prayer, the scene is gone. He pressed the pencil point so hard it dented the page without leaving a mark. He added, in smaller script, because a man can be brave in tiny letters, but it is not over yet. I closed the notebook for a moment and let the dark of that morning settle. The village had done what it always meant to do. It had cleaned. It had blessed. It had shut the door. And somewhere a man who knew how to tie a sailor's knot, who knew how to tamp soil until it thumped just so, who was comfortable enough to step in as if it were his kitchen, was listening to the bell and measuring how long it would take for the smell to fade and for the questions to go still. People think monsters are loud. They aren't. Monsters learn quickly to use other people's quiet. Contradictory testimonies. The interrogation room was barely a shack, its timber walls pressing in so tight that even the breath of those inside seemed to collide midair. An oil lamp sputtered over the table, throwing crooked shadows on the wall, shadows that looked more like sins than men. I, the unseen witness, stood in the corner where light refused to go, watching, listening. The young constable sat at the center, notebook open, pencil trembling in his hand. His eyes were red from a sleepless night, his skin still stinking of blood and burnt straw. He had studied crime in textbooks, neat diagrams, and sterile phrases. But he had never smelled human blood, never heard bones crack under iron. Now he faced an entire village ready to bury the truth under silence. At the head of the table sat the village chief, thick hands folded, eyes cold with the impatience of a man who wanted the case over before it began. Beside him, the parish priest whispered prayers under his breath, the words flowing like chains over the room. Along the walls, villagers pressed shoulder to shoulder, nervous, but with eyes darting like thieves guarding secrets. The first testimony came from an old widow. Her voice shook, cracked with fear. That night, I heard pounding. Not the sound of fence posts, not stones breaking. It was blunt force into something soft, like slaughtering meat in the dark. Her claw-like fingers twisted her sleeve, her milky eyes leaking tears. The room trembled with her words. But immediately, a young man near the door laughed dry. She's hearing the wind. It was storming that night. Trees cracked like rifles. She just imagined the rest. His laughter stretched long and cruel, drowning her tremor. The constable glanced toward the chief. The chief nodded once, siding with the boy. The pencil in the young man's hand dug hard, scratching the page. The word hammer stretched across the line like a scar. In his mind, a war raged. Trust the tremor of an old woman, or the smirk of a man who wanted her silenced. Next came a middle-aged woman, voice steady but wary. The chimney smoke, it never stopped. Thick, acrid, like cloth burning. But a farmer cut her short. Nights were cold. They kept the fire up. Nothing strange in that. Heads nodded around the room, crushing her account into dust. The constable froze, pencil hovering. Another lead, snuffed by a chorus of agreement. Then a young girl stepped forward, clutching her dress so tight her knuckles whitened. I saw someone, tall, broad shoulders, moving slow, like he knew the yard. The room erupted. The chief barked. Moonlight makes trees into giants. Young girls see what they want to fear. Her voice died under his. The constable scrawled, uncertain. Another nail hammered into the coffin of truth. A husband and wife came next. The wife swore she'd heard a dog barking, cut off mid-howl, followed by pounding blows. Her husband reddened, shouting her down. I slept fine. She makes up stories. Their argument spiraled, voices clashing in the cramped room. The young constable sat paralyzed, unsure whose reality to trust. His notes shrank to vague fragments, as useless as the smoke in the widow's memory. Then a red-faced farmer staggered forward, reeking of liquor. He swore he'd seen a flicker of lantern light in the attic that night. For a second, silence gripped the room. Then the laughter came again, louder, mocking. Drunk visions. He sees flames even in his soup. He slammed his fist, swearing again, but his voice drowned beneath the crowd's jeers. The constable's lips pressed tight. He wanted to believe, but the village wouldn't let him. His hand wrote one word, doubtful. That word fell like a stone down a well, truth sinking, soundless. Finally, the priest's voice rose, smooth and solemn. Pray for the dead. Do not reopen wounds. Every question only torments their souls further. His tone dripped like holy oil, sanctifying silence itself. The constable sagged in his chair. The pencil slipped, rolled across the table, clattering louder than his own voice ever had. I hovered close, feeling his pulse thunder, his breath stumble. Last night, the slaughter in the barn had broken his innocence. Today, the chorus of contradictions was breaking his resolve. He was no longer fighting a killer. He was fighting a village armed with denial. When the questioning ended, the room went heavy as a grave. Villagers shuffled out, boots scraping the stone like the hiss of earth shoveling onto coffins. The chief clapped a meaty hand on the constable's shoulder, murmuring, "You're young. Don't dig deeper. This village needs peace, not justice." His shadow swallowed the last of the lamplight as he walked out. The constable sat frozen, notebook open. On the page, uncertain, doubtful, wind, imagination. Every word a trap, every line a betrayal. His eyes burned as if staring at his own defeat in ink. Inside, he screamed. Outside, he bowed his head like a boy in church. Then, movement. A tiny hand tugged at his coat. A boy, no older than 9, hair the color of straw, eyes wide and terrified yet blazing. He whispered, "I saw someone. Up in the attic." He bent down, his eyes shone like fire. The room iced over. The constable crouched, voice cracking. "You're certain?" The boy nodded hard. But before he could say more, his mother rushed in, clamping a hand over his mouth. Children dream foolish things. "Don't listen." She dragged him out, terror flashing in her eyes. Not that her son was wrong, but that he might be right. The constable scribbled reluctantly. "Child, uncertain." The letters carved crooked, burying the brightest clue of the day. I wanted to shout, "This is it, the key." But the boy was already gone, his gaze the last 2 sparks of fire swallowed by darkness. Later, a weary peasant woman crept into the doorway, hands rough as bark. She held out a scrap of scorched cloth, edges frayed, still stinking of burnt fabric. Her voice trembled. "I found this in the ditch. Looks like a piece from the girl's dress." Before the constable could take it, a man surged forward, voice low and venomous. "Women's gossip. That's nothing but a rag." He snatched it, slammed it to the floor, crushed it under his boot. "Don't smear the village with lies." The constable froze. The chief cleared his throat. "He's right. Just a rag." The priest's eyes sank to the table, lips murmuring scripture. The woman wilted back, tears spotting the dirt at her feet. For a heartbeat, the constable's hand lifted to rescue the cloth, but faltered midair. Slowly, shamefully, it retreated. He wrote, "Unverified." Every hesitation another nail in truth's coffin. Then the blacksmith staggered in, clothes singed, eyes glazed from drink and years of fire. He laughed hoarsely, voice slurred but urgent. "I heard axes, not one voice, 2. One gave orders, the other obeyed." The room froze, then erupted in laughter. "He's drunk again," someone shouted. "Hears hammers even in his sleep." The crowd's mockery drowned him. Yet beneath the laughter, I felt it. The sharp intake of breath, the unease no one dared admit. Because if there were 2 voices, then the killer wasn't an outsider. It meant accomplices. It meant neighbors. The constable swallowed hard, hand quivering as he wrote. Possible drunken delusion. But he heard it too, the fear hiding inside their ridicule. Days later, the blacksmith was gone. No forged smoke. No booming laugh at the tavern. Some claimed he'd wandered off. Others muttered he'd died alone in the woods. But I knew better. His disappearance was a tear in the fabric, and behind it, something darker had swallowed him whole. That night, alone in his quarters, the constable stared at his own words. Child, uncertain. Cloth, unverified. Blacksmith, delusion. He dropped his face into his hands, shoulders shaking. Sweat dripped onto the page, bleeding the graphite into gray streaks. Ink and sweat merged like blood and water in the farmyard dirt. He didn't weep aloud. He didn't need to. His silence was heavier than any sob. He wasn't losing to a killer. He was losing to a village that had decided to forget. And each testimony dismissed was another hammer blow to his spirit. In that silence, I wrote my own line in the shadows. The killer wasn't alone, and neither was the village. Dawn marks. Dawn wrapped the village in a blanket that smelled of wet grass. The dirt road was soft under the constable's boots. His footfalls seemed to sink into a white, breathless mouth. He hadn't slept. All night, roof whisper and a faint shifting, no louder than a thought turning over, had moved in his chest where a heartbeat should be. I walked a pace behind him, shadowless, nameless, watching the knots of muscle jump at the base of his skull each time his mind replayed the yard, the dragged bodies, the well-meaning hands of the villagers rummaging through what could no longer speak. Truth and mud had mixed. He'd decided to return alone, before the sun climbed high enough to summon curiosity, before more hands touched what silence still guarded. The farm surfaced through the gauze like a memory that hadn't decided to show its face. Dark tiles, bleached planks, a door ajar like a half-closed eyelid. The yard held its breath. Yesterday's footprints were smudged, but a few ran deeper and longer, strokes from a heavy hand, not the wandering of the idol. He crouched and pressed his fingers to the rim of a deep heel mark, edges sharp, toe angled toward the rear of the stalls. Long stride, even spacing. A man carrying weight doesn't always stagger. If he's trained for it, he sets his rhythm. He wrote in the notebook, pencil biting dark from a palm slick with sweat. Boot impressions deeper than grade. Axis to backyard. Stride 70 to 75 centimeters, regular. He crossed the porch. The faint mud track that had climbed yesterday's step was now a thin gray, but a frayed border still clung to one side, like the lifted edge of a sealed letter. Someone had come, pulled, hesitated, then pulled again. He rested 2 fingers on the step as if taking a pulse, then went into the kitchen. Dawn light didn't conquer the room so much as peel off a thin layer of dusk. A wooden bowl lay off-center on the table. Where the kettle usually sat, a pale ring, its chipped rim he'd traced once with a thumbnail, had softened at the edges. The ladle tilted at a new angle, not the angle from last night. Someone had touched it, or he had without noticing. He sighed. The sound carried the beeswax of yesterday's lamp. 2 fresh scrapes shone brighter than the worn floor where a chair had been shoved in. He tugged the twin chair to test the grain. The new marks weren't parallel, one line shallower on the left. A left-handed pull, sudden. He set his left hand on the chair's back and pictured another palm there, yanking, sitting, breathing, eating. A thin smear of brown fat streaked the table's edge, not soup fat, but something saltire, darker. He wrote, grease trace diagonal toward left, left dominant user. At the window ledge, dust lay even except for a strip at eye level, 3 fingers wide. Someone had wiped it with a sleeve to look out. On the glass edge, a half-moon swipe, as if a wrist had tried to bat snow aside and stopped midway. The family used to stand here, but this wipe rode atop a newer dust than the grime in the frame. Not habit from the house, a habit from an arrival. He leaned close. His breath fogged a tiny oval on his reflection, red eyes, bruised crescents, jaw clamped. Kitchens aren't just for cooking, he understood now. There where someone else had lived. He moved to the threshold between kitchen and porch and paused, as if crossing a seam only he could see. The air changed, wet straw, old iron, animal heat. The stall was dim. An old horse huffed steam into the chill. The hay had been pushed aside, exposing pocked dirt. A broad track, palm-wide, ran on the bias from the door to a plank wall. Yesterday a villager's boot had softened part of it, but farther along, the pressed edges still held. mud fibers laid flat by something heavy dragging before the ground fully dried. On the wall, 3 dents at temple height, round, skewed, shallow. He set his palm over them and felt splinters lift like fish whiskers. In his head, 3 dull knocks rang, lead drops into a basin. On the stall floor near there, one solitary heel dug deep, its rim heaped, a plant to pull mark. He knelt, measured against a finger's span, logged it. In the corner, a steel hook bowed bare. Near the curve, the metal shone brighter than the rest, a nickel flash under sour morning light. Overhead, a beam wore dust except for one hairline clean streak, exactly where a long handle might have kissed it. If it was an adze, he didn't think the word, not out loud. Then a weapon had hung here, had been lifted, had brushed the beam coming or going. He looked up and triangulated the streak against the chimney thimble, a straight, invisible line through space stitching points of behavior. The horse stamped. He flinched and turned. Its black eye fixed on him, the white showing. Inside that look was a kind of memory beyond names. The animal had witnessed and kept mute. He backed a step from the helplessness in it. He cut across to the backyard. Along the low stone fence, a shallow runnel tracked the length, deeper than the ground around it, a thin dry ditch. In its bed, a river-worn slab gleamed on one edge, not rainshine but polish from repeat contact. Boot soles skimming the same corner, again and again. He set his heel there, perfect fit. The runnel pointed not to the main road, but to a slender footpath behind the house. An exit that didn't speak. He sighted the distance to the tree-line, hundreds of paces. With wind, marks like this die fast. No sign of departure, they like to say. There was sign. It had learned the geography's language. He circled back toward the attic. The stair was old and tight, boards creaking like winter-cracked skin. Third tread nipped at the corner. A tall man would duck. At the top, a rectangle of dark waited. He lowered a knee and dust rose all at once, must and time stinging his nose. By the chimney, a thin seam, darker than the dark, ran along the plank. The wood on its lip held a low gloss as if a coat cuff had rubbed there, thoughtlessly, many times. He put his ear to the floorboard, a foolish act, mostly instinct, and didn't hear sound, but felt a cadence. The cadence of someone who had lain here often, lying, rolling, bracing a forearm against a beam, stilling. On the plank, pinched cigarette ends were cemented by ash. The ash here sparkled with fine salt. Kitchen dust fused to tobacco, tiny crystals on gray like sugar on slate. He picked one up and cracked it. Cheap leaf, the kind hawked at market. He pictured the tobacco seller, a man who counted coins with a dead-numb thumb. Last night the man said he'd sold to no strangers lately. Last night that was enough. This morning, that needed testing. He straightened, ducking the low beam. 5 faint finger cleanings touched the beam at eye level, exact width of a hand. Someone had leaned there to watch the kitchen below. Often, heat climbed his neck, blood knocked in his left temple. He had to grip the beam to steady his knees. Down the stair again, he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked out into the yard. The mist had thinned. Far off, a hen shuffled into straw, the domestic hush of any morning. He shut his eyes half a second, opened, overlaying 2 frames. This morning's tidy gray on last night's red. His pulse climbed as if someone beat a drum inside his coat. I could hear the sentence forming in him though he didn't speak. He was here, in this house, above their heads. A small foot scraped gravel. He turned. A boy stood at the gate, clutching a busted wooden toy cart. The look on his face had the wobble of a kid who knows fear, but still plays chicken with it. The constable softened his voice and approached the way you approach a skittish deer. "You live close by?" The boy nodded. "Sleep all right?" A shake. "Hear anything?" The boy's eyes tilted to the roof. His lips worked. "They're up there. Like someone breathing." The constable held his own breath, not to scare the words. When the house next door went dark. Ever heard it before? Yes, sometimes. Mama says wind. And Mama, as if conjured by the admission, yanked him by the wrist from behind, hissing, "Home." The boy craned back, trying to finish. The sound, it stops. Then again, his voice vanished into fog. The constable rubbed his face, as if erasing the feeling of having just lost something dearer than money. He skirted the back fence. At a broken stone, a short length of rusted wire sat wedged in a gap, brown like dried ink. Not this farm's fencing. The twist pattern, double loop, hook bend, was the work of someone used to hanging things. He pried with a nail. The wire popped free and left a reddish smear. He wrote, "Rusted wire segment, hanger twist, connect to stall hook." Anyone who wanted to could wave it off. Old fence. He knew better. Objects remember without bias. You only have to look like you mean it. Near noon, the light seeped into the yard the way water seeps into dry dirt. Back inside to check a second time. As he stepped through the threshold, the door shivered. A flutter of air or a look slipping past. The ash smell still crowded the kitchen, with a sunken milk tang underneath. On the pantry latch, one side shone slicker than the other, used by a right hand. The murdered old man had been left dominant. The kettle scar, the knife callus at the thumb pad in a photo from last year. Whoever opened the pantry lately wasn't him. He swung the door. Empty, except a pinch of salt on the shelf. Salt had traveled from kitchen to stall. He'd seen the tiny white flecks strewn along that path. The intruder had been the one tying those rooms together with habit. Habit is a stronger shackle than iron cuffs. A soft rasp came from outside, rope on hook. He stepped onto the porch. No one. Wind shifted the forest's breath across the yard. On the porch post, a faint mud smear at a tall man's hand height, as if bracing to stretch. A chip of lime from the plaster clung to a nail edge. The hurried "don't wash, don't change boots, don't fear trace." A man of the house, or a man who believed he was. He set the notebook on the rail. The damp of his palm printed the cover. He wrote fast, a tally. Yard boot line to back. Fence runnel. Ladle tilt. Grease skew. Wiped window. Chair scrapes. Hook. Beam streak. Rusted wire. Nicked stair. 5 finger marks on beam. Cheap butts. Salt and ash. Glossy pantry latch right-handed. The pencil snapped. A gray shard skittered across the step. He picked it up as if rescuing a piece of memory. Voices drifted from the lane. 3 men in hats, speaking low but staged to be overheard. "You hear? That drunk from Hans's place didn't show up this morning. Folks say he rolled into the lake. By the reeds. Was ranting about a shape last night. Ghost talk." Another chuckled. "Die by the bottle, die in the water." Pebbles clicked under their soles as they passed, leaving husks of words. The constable's knuckles whitened on the rail. The pulse in his neck jumped. A wordless no struck through him like a wire. The drunk, the only one who'd slurred about a shadow, was gone. Maybe the bottle took him. Maybe not. In a place like this, death knows how to borrow familiar clothes and walk out the front door without invitation. He stared at the fence line, then at the runnel that pointed to the back path, and felt that path unspool toward the reeds, bend into the shape of a falling body. No evidence. Only coincidence. But the coincidence pricked him. He sat on the step, hands cradling his head. His breathing hitched, steadied, hitched. Not crying, not cursing. The sound a man makes when he finds a small door in a dark house, opens it, and discovers a corridor of more doors. He rose slowly, checked the kitchen door, felt the stall hook, brushed the pantry latch. Ritual motions of a man who wants to say goodbye and also memorize what each surface tells his skin. In the yard, he crossed the blurred boot mark, then turned once to study the roofline. Up in the rafters, a hair-thin filament of light trembled. No breathing, but a rhythm lived there regardless, whether in the wood's memory or his own. On the road back, the village came awake. Plowblades bit, voices traded across fields. An old woman watched him from a threshold, then pretended not to. 2 kids punted a frozen clod, laughing. Peace wore its everyday face as if last night had never been. He passed the butcher's. Meat hung, knife rose and fell, the chopping block bruised, an old routine running without asking anyone's permission. Hans's tavern sat shuttered. The signboard swung and tapped the jamb with a hollow clack. He paused. Mud had pooled into a crescent at the sill, height just right for a body dragged through. Thin as straw, enough to make a certain kind of man snort. He didn't snort. He walked on, gripping the notebook harder. Back at the post, the room smelled of paper and old lamp. He spread the morning's pages. Each line wavered a little. From his coat, he drew a black wool thread, laid it on the blank. It was fine, dusty, curled at one tip. He blew. Dust bloomed into a coin of light. He sandwiched the thread in blotting paper and wrote, "Attic, wool fiber, with salt." prob cheap sweater/scarf. In the corner, he set the rusted wire and circled it hard. He sat and listened to the wall clock hop a notch, each tick like a drop of ink falling into the cup of his palm. He wasn't only writing a report, he was writing a vow. And even here, a sigh was already forming, the ghost of tomorrow. In front of him, one wall waited. The chief, the priest, the villagers, fear, the custom of let it be. Behind him, another wall. Inexperience, no rank, blunt tools. Between them, he might yet pry loose a brick. A knock. A guard stuck in his head. By the reeds, somebody found the drunk's cap. No sign of him. He said it like weather. The door closed. Silence fell back, thick as a damp blanket. The constable leaned into the chair and palmed his eyes. He wasn't sleeping, only letting the dark pass once over his pupils so they could learn a different kind of dim. I stood close and didn't touch. Some moments belong to a man alone with the pulse that grows in his ear. Fear, anger, helplessness, and resolve, once the others tire. Afternoon slid down without warning. The room's color dropped a shade, like paper that had been hidden under a book too long. He buckled the notebook, stood up. At the doorway, his shadow overlapped the coat racks. 2 men, 1 skin. He paused, as if hearing his own footfalls tomorrow, then stepped through. Outside, wind combed the chestnut leaves, carrying the lake's chill. No more mist, only another damp, the kind that comes with bad news not yet spoken. He faced the treeline where the black ran deeper than the sky. In the chain of those dark patches, one eye was open, the old attic, and still watching the living. He drew breath, let it out, and started walking. I kept pace and counted the small noises. Boot leather on dry grit, notebook board nudging a brass button, the pencil stub ticking a rusted wire in his pocket. Each noise a dot on an invisible map, connecting into one thin line that left the farm and would, if luck and nerve held, circle back. For now, the morning had tattooed itself faintly into his stride. Deep-set boot falls angling to the rear, the fence runnel where grass would soon grow back, the left-bit stair, the 5-finger clears on the beam, the salt caught in ash, the roof breathing retold by a child dragged away, the drunk rumored gone without a period. The morning ended. Its shadow stretched into evening. It refused to sleep. It would return after dark when he sat at the table, tapping the glass rim each time he was about to skip a detail. It would stand at the window while he wrote, unclear, and tug his sleeve when he trusted grown-ups more than children. It was the best shadow he owned now, the kind that won't let you close your eyes. And though he'd only met crimes in textbooks, he was beginning to learn how to walk under that shadow without tripping. In cases like this, that is the only road left. Shattered before the village. Morning began like a dry cough. Thin, horse lights spilled over the village roofs in paper-thin strips that warmed no one. I followed the young constable through a narrow lane onto the square, where people had already massed into a tight ring. Night mist still clung to hat brims. Breath steamed white. The sour of cheap liquor and sweat tried to smother the damp earth smell. Murmurs piled on murmurs like a hive split open. His coat still carried the stall straw and stove ash from the night before. His boots were freckled with mud like crossed-out words. The village headman stood on a step, scarf wound thick at his neck, face red from cold, voice warm by design. He patted his hands for quiet, then turned toward the constable with a chalk-straight smile. "We're grateful you came early, but this is a small village. People have fields to turn and church to attend. Everyone knows the pain. Don't make a spectacle of it." Make a spectacle. The phrase dropped like a paving stone into a well, coming up cold and hollow. An old woman with white hair hugged a child to her chest and nodded faintly. A few young men put on brave faces while burrowing their hands deeper into numb pockets. Another woman tightened her scarf and whispered, "Let them be." Eyes not on any face but sliding over all of them, because once you say them, the dead become a single, nameless lump. The young constable swallowed. I heard it snag like a bone. He held his back straight. "The scene was touched far too much," he said, voice hard because it had to be. "I need statements from everyone who was there last night." "What statements?" A carpenter snorted, a gold tooth winking. "We were all in our beds. Whole village heard the wind. That's all." Little laughs agreed around him. Wind got stressed just right, scooping every odd noise of the night into one harmless sack. The priest came up on his stick. His black cassock was wet along the hem. He set a hand to his chest, bowed, and studied the constable with a kind, measuring look. "My son, grief should be buried soon. Let the souls rest." Rest drifted out like smoke, and smoke stings the eyes of anyone who still needs to see clearly. The constable opened his notebook. The page trembled in time with his hand. "Father, there are still details." "Details," the headman cut in, voice sweet and blade thin. "Don't save the dead. They can kill the honor of the living. You're an outsider. You don't know what rumor costs." He lifted his chin at the crowd. "Neighbors, let's help. Bring the boards to the yard. Let them be clean one last time." I watched the constable's chest tighten. "Don't." Never made it to air. A team of men had already stepped over the smudged chalk line. They didn't shout or smash. They did their kindness with the briskness of men trying to end a headache. Hauling boards, spreading cloth, locking arms. Would hit ground with a dry rap, a sanctioned incursion. He lunged to block them. "Wait." His hand landed on a shoulder hard as culvert stone. "Wait till when?" The man snapped, eyes bloodshot. "Wait for what?" "For town men to come ogle us like a fair." The words ricocheted off brick and fell into gravel. Everywhere they touched, more whispers sprouted. "Fair, fair." The constable panted, scanning for a single consenting face. None. Heads dipped. Scarves crept higher over throats. Eyes slid past one another like water over glass. The group had decided before he spoke they would not stretch today another inch. The priest stepped in closer, laid a palm on the constable's wrist. The pressure of an old hand, warm, steady, was heavier than cuffs. "Son," he murmured so low only I, standing at his shoulder, heard it. "Sometimes truth is bought with too much blood. You are still young." Young. Again, equal parts pity and hammer. He drew his hand back slowly, as from a first snare. His eyes filmed, but didn't break. One tear now, and the village would label him weak. They began to move the heavy shapes into the yard. Old cloth wrapped them. Careful hands tugged straight. A few breaths forced themselves quiet. The earth took creases, the last signatures of the house. Far hedgerows hissed. The forest's voice scored a mute liturgy. I stood beside him and heard his breathing shift from quick to tight. An old woman edged up and pushed a small cloth sack into his hand. "Eat a bite, dear, don't write anymore." The pastry's warm grease slid over his fingers, mixing with ash, straw, and cooled blood, the kitchen smell covering everything. He let the bag fall to the step like handing over a written loss. It split. White salt kernels rolled into the no-man's land between chalk and mud. A thumb-sized wooden cross showed half its body at the bottom. Sunlight tapped a little gold on it. "We're not going to argue," the headman said, voice lowered now in a way that both soothed and warned. "Leave it. Burn straw in the stall. Wash clean. The living have to live." He looked up at the constable, smile trimmed of sugar, steel at the edge. "If you want to help us with something decent." He wanted to say, "Decent is preserving the truth." The word stuck in the throat of a man just invited to the edge of the circle. He closed the notebook. The clap of its boards sounded like a door slammed in haste. By noon the post room was a lamp oil box of paper and stale heat. He sat over the desk with his pencil hovering. Lines flooded through his head like ants, but each one toppled off the paper's edge and died. He started a report with "at approximately" and stopped. No approximately anyone would allow. He tried. At the scene stopped. The scene had been baptized by 100 hands. He tried. Witnesses report stopped. Every witness said wind. A round sweat print bloomed on the page, an illegal exit stain. In the corner, a cup of water had taken a skin of lamp oil, like a film laid over eyes. He wiped his face. The web of his fingers still smelled of salt from the old woman's pastry, the same salt that had dusted the ash trail tying kitchen to stall. He'd etched that line in his mind's photo, and now no one wanted to hear it. The door pushed open. The headman came in without knocking, two broad-shouldered men behind him, a cartwright and a timber hauler. They didn't sit. They didn't smile. They weren't yelling. Their stillness was the loudest kind of anger. "Boy," the headman said, "we need a certificate. Farm accident, cause unclear, no sign of outsider entry. You sign, we send up to the district. People have funerals to keep." He looked up. I saw a spark jump in his eyes. "No sign of outsider," he repeated, soft. "Then an insider?" The air clipped short. Behind the headman, boots creaked on wood. "Mind your tongue," the headman said slowly, like pushing pellets through his teeth. "Every family here is kin to another. Don't seed poison." He set a drafted statement on the desk and slid it toward him. "Sign, we're human to human." He stared at the sheet like it was a shallow puddle that would swallow him. His hand took the pen, the nib quivered. I wanted him to snap it, to hear the crack. He didn't. Under the phrase outsider, he wrote 3 words, insufficient grounds yet. Thin as a hair, but different. The headman frowned. "Right your way," he said, even. "We'll live ours." They left. The door kissed the jamb with a dry clack. The room felt larger for the space they'd cleared. I stood at his back. He set the pen down and dropped a rung inside himself, as if the chair lost a leg. His head sank, so low I thought his blood would spill onto the desk. A hand clawed into his hair and held it in place. His thumb beaded red where his nail bit skin. Outside in the yard, the church bell knocked. Uneven, someone testing for a funeral. The sound bounced off the post's plank ceiling and ran his veins like a thin strip of fire. He straightened, pulled another stack of paper. Not the report, the diary. On the first line he wrote, "Too late already?" He crossed it out. Wrote, "Not yet." Crossed again. Left it blank. Afternoon held still in a suspicious way. Clouds sealed over the village roofs. The cold cinched the throat. I kept close as he went back to the farm. What people were calling a final look, and what was really a losing side's last glance at what had beaten him. Clean straw had been scattered in the yard. Gray puddles dried to alkali stains. Mud and salt had blended into truce gray. Footprints were wiped smooth like words on sand licked off before you finish reading. In the kitchen, new ash lay over old. A fine white flour dusted everything, turning the house into a fasting cake. Neat, mild, innocent. "Don't go in again," a woman called from the eaves. "There's nothing left." "Don't" sounded like a window shutting by itself. He stopped by the stove bench and studied the faint brown circle where the kettle belonged. Someone had wiped it, but the chipped segment left one arc darker. He laid his palm on the cold board and felt for the kettle's weight, for heat pooling in the heel of his hand. The memory of objects is more faithful than people. He stood there too long for the living. I heard the priest cough softly on the porch, the cough of a man well read on easing souls away without a ripple. "They say the drunk never came home," a young man blurted as he loped past, tossing the words into the air and running on. His voice cracked, a suppressed sob turned sideways. It skimmed the constable's ear, struck the base of his skull, and hid in the road dust. The drunk, the one who'd boasted he heard hammering on the roof, the one the constable meant to take a formal statement from this afternoon. The drunk, the only mouth that said anything not named Wind. The constable whipped around. "Who said?" But the runner had vanished behind a rack of drying sweet potato vines, leaving dots of mud up his shins. The pond lay only a few hundred paces from the farm. Those paces became steps down a well. Villagers dotted the bank of brown water. A gaff hook coiled with rope lay across the reeds like a sleeping snake. "Must have slipped," someone said, the tone people used to invite you to sit, polite and final, no answer required. "Liquor," a second added. "Out late," a third stamped the seal. The constable eased to the edge. Somebody's boots had already made room for his. White scum patterned the surface like lime on the post-room wall. A felt hat bobbed face down at the grass. He knelt and lifted it. Inside, nothing but old booze and the same tobacco smoke he'd smelled in the attic. His hand stalled a heartbeat. Only one. He set the hat back. The crowd exhaled as if they had dodged a gag. No one pulled him under. A man said, eyes steady on the constable. Only liquor and his own sin. A beautiful ending. It shut the other ending, that a hand had pushed. He didn't argue. He knew this dialect. Stories here closed themselves the instant they edged toward a name. He turned away. The sun fell into the trees. Yellow gripped the black fringe the way a child's nails clutched the bed rail when being dragged off. He stood at the road's shoulder, notebook heavy as brick. I stood close. Cold threaded our coats. Mud and spirits took turns in the air. Night dropped for good. The priest had finished a short rite. The headman had finished the papers. Families went home lighter, like men who had mucked a stall. The post shrank back to 4 walls and one young man. He lit the lamp. Flame fluttered against soot glass. Each time the wick tightened, The shadow on the wall hitched. He opened the diary and carved large, hard words. Witness vanished. Pause. Edited. Witness fell in water. Pause. Crossed out. Witness no longer. Crossed out. He left the space empty. The blank carried more truth than any word. He wanted to write a name. The nib slid into the first letter, a small hook rising, and stopped as if his hand met glass. His teeth grated in a sad, pinched way, the sound of a head that knows what a hand knows not to do. Under the desk, a cricket let out one chirp and quit. A signal lost. He stood at once, shrugged into his coat without buttoning. Wine slapped the loose hem against his thigh. He stepped into the porch. The sky was clean with stars. The wind blew one way only, like a banker at the vault door. He walked toward the church for no reason, but walking. Crushed stone hissed. His pace fell into time with a wordless why. Those whys came from the ribs. The mouth was too tired to carry them. The church was dark except for a lamp before the statue. A figure stood there already. The priest. He turned, nodded. The men stood in silence. Beeswax, dry wool, old wood. This is the smell of rooms where the unsayable is told to a listener who never answers. There are things, the priest began, speaking as if a third person had joined them, that, if named, leave no place for anyone to live here. Do you understand? He wasn't threatening. He wasn't soothing. He just looked. What should I write then? The constable asked. It was the first time he used father's child word in his voice, son. In that question lived the hunger of an orphan at the stove. The priest glanced toward the forest. Write what you can live with for the rest of your life. He folded his hands and fell quiet. Not a cruel answer. Honest, in the way of men who've survived many harvests. What can't be eaten gets dried. He went back to the post. Saturday. Stared at the white. The lamp cut a shallow gold pond. Beyond it was shadow. Shadows of the words he'd crossed out. The man in the water. The attic steps no one would mention. He put the pen down and wrote very slowly. I stop here. Period. A black dot that drank what light there was. His shoulders sloped, but did not collapse. His giving up didn't cry. It set like ice closing over a pond. Flat, clear, cold, and dangerous to anyone who tries to step again. He closed the diary, buttoned his coat, blew out the lamp. In that blink before the dark took the room, I saw his hand on the cover. Not resisting, not pleading. Just holding. Holding what? Perhaps the smallest piece of truth he'd touched before it was buried by mud, by salt, by clean straw, by paper, and by polite sentences like don't make a spectacle. Night swallowed the box. Outside, the wind changed shifts. Somewhere, under a roof already torn, dust still fell by habit into the shallow left by a body that no longer lay there. I stood in the black and heard his heart knock, not racing like morning, not rasping like noon. Even. Tired. Not done. I knew. This was when the 1922 investigation died. And when another seed, pinhead small, was pushed by accident into the diary board. The seed of a promise he wouldn't voice. One day, when ice thaws, someone else will lean over this water and see the face everyone pretended not to see tonight. Next morning, the village was calm as if nothing had passed. The timber hauler carried the same number of bundles. The pastry woman salted with the same measured hand. The headman put on a crisp vest and joked with the taxman. The church bell hit 10 on the nose. Only the young constable rose late, eyes red, left hand heavier than the right because the diary had gained a page. He opened the door and drew in air that was too clean. Ashwork finished. He looked toward the woods, then down at the road, then at his own hand. There was nothing left here for a man who couldn't bow. He turned his back, walked. Each step sounded like a nail going into the lid of a box that still rattled faintly inside. I followed without prints. I couldn't pull a man back from slipping. I couldn't stuff the swallowed statements back into the book. All I could do was remember, and set it down in a kind of ink no one erases. The ink of what it feels like when a whole community agrees to call darkness wind. At the yard's corner, the old woman's cloth bag still lay where it had been, nudged aside, likely kicked. The salt was gone. The wooden cross had lost its shine. It lay quiet, a spent exclamation point. I let my eyes rest on it one breath longer, then went after him out of the village, across a small bridge over the ditch where stones had been polished by feet. The sun climbed, not warmer, only clearer. Clear enough to show one thing. Last night's truth didn't die for lack of light. It died of too many clean hands. At the last bend, he stopped and glanced back. A thief's look, stealing a single image. The farm was gone, but the land held a bruise. He faced forward. This time he didn't look back. I knew he would live with that shadow. I would live inside it. And though this chapter closes with 3 words, I stop here, the story does not. What stops is a pen, not a debt. That morning the sky spread a dull, unwashed gray over everything, like a sheet hung out before it's been scrubbed. The air in the village was just as heavy, but not with yesterday's panic when the crowd had swarmed Hinterkaifeck, dragging bodies, shouting, wailing. Today's stillness had a different weight, the hush of a secret nailed into a wooden chest, buried and politely forgotten. Everyone knew that chest lay somewhere under their feet. No one dared touch it. The night before, I'd sat with the young officer in the little station room and watched him hunch over the scarred desk. The oil lamp threw his shadow long and shaky against the wall, like a soul trying to slip free. He wrote without stopping, hand trembling so hard the nib rasped like teeth grinding. The later it got, the more the sentences broke, the more the ink bled. Half-lines quit mid-breath. Pages went out of order, a mind torn in too many directions. His journal was no longer a stream of reason. It was blotched water, an exact map of his head. I could feel the helplessness eating through each stroke, the helplessness of a man trying to hold on to truth by its frayed thread while the pit waited. When the first thin light slipped through the door seam, he looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed dark as a cave. Hair wild, shirt sour with sweat and lamp smoke. He hadn't slept. He had nothing left. I walked behind him like a shadow as he took the dirt lane toward the gate. Yesterday's shoe prints were still stamped in layers, dried and cracked, questions that hadn't been answered. The air still carried old blood and musty straw, and now and then, a cheap perfume ghosted in from the woman who had stood too close to the scene. Those clashing smells clotted into a rank note, the after scent of a play brought down without cleaning the stage, because scrubbing would force you to remember. He had barely reached the station when a breathless runner shoved a city-sealed envelope into his hands. He slid it with shaking fingers, read, and his shoulder twitched. His lips moved without sound. I saw his eyes go dark. News from home. His mother gravely ill, his father bedridden, come at once. A quiet collapse moved through him. It was the last blow. He hadn't cracked the case. He hadn't taken all the statements. He hadn't fit the shards together. Family duty, summons from a far house, tightened like rope and pulled him clean out of Hinterkaifeck's blood. He gripped the journal, then let it go. It fell open on a broken page. The last line had only made it halfway. If I had one more day. The stroke stuttered and died like a breath cut off. Outside, the village had snapped back to routine with brutal speed. Men shouldered straw, led cattle, set out goods. Voices called. Children chased one another. They looked at the young officer with a blend of pity and relief. The stranger who came would now leave like a gust. What had happened in that farm, blood, bodies, dark, was better off slipping away. The headman intercepted him at the 3-way, patted his shoulder, and smiled a thin porridge smile. You're young. Don't let a few corpses ruin your career. The living need you more than the dead. Go home. We'll handle this. The village will. People within earshot nodded, as if the murder of 6 were only a boulder that had rolled into a field. Trouble, yes, but easily filled. They avoided his eyes. They avoided mine, though I'm only the invisible one at his side. That aversion was the first brick in the wall that swallowed this case from day one. His last night before leaving, he sat alone at the desk. No more official report. He wrote a letter instead, folded it, and slid it into the journal. I didn't read it all, but a draft lifted the edge and showed a few shaking words. I'm sorry. I saw, and I couldn't hold it. If anyone ever reads this, go on. Don't let the hammer sound stay in the dark. He sat for a long time. His lamp shadow shrank and swayed. In that emptied-out gaze, I could see 2 pains pulling him apart. One for his parents, failing. One for 6 souls sunk without justice. He chose family. The choice would haunt him like a private curse. At dawn, a horse cart waited at the gate. He carried a small valise, a few shirts, some papers. No journal. It lay on the desk, ajar. A cross breeze lifted several torn pages to the floor. I bent to gather them. Slanted letters, Ink bloomed like stains that won't wash. Those pages would be all that proved how hard he tried and how he failed. He turned for a last look at the village. There was no anger in it, no hate, only a paralysis of regret, as if someone had shoved him out of a dark room before he could switch on the light. He would always wonder who was still breathing inside. The wheels rolled. Gravel screamed under the iron rims, like a pencil snapping in the middle of the page. I stayed, the ripped sheets in my hand, and heard the tremor in every letter. I keep the notebook. The village keeps silence. Both are coffin lids. Hinterkaifeck didn't close. It was buried alive by clean hands. On his desk, the journal's spine sighed as the cover settled. Between two leaves, the apology hid. In the gutter of the page, a single flake of gray, ash from a cheap cigarette, had fused into the paper grain, a grit the war years would never shake loose. Out in the yard, someone swept fresh straw over the yard scabs. At the pond, a felt hat turned in the reeds, and no one asked who had pushed it there. At the church, a bell was tested once, then twice, both times offbeat. On the attic beam, 5 pale prints of a hand remained under the dust, smeared thin by a sleeve. The cart reached the bend and was gone. For a moment the lane held the sound the way an empty room holds echoes, then let it thin. Doors opened, chores resumed. A housewife shook crumbs from a cloth. A farmhand whistled an off-key tune to bluff off sickness. The headman, vest pressed crisp, rehearsed the line he'd use for the district clerk. The priest knelt, lips moving, fixing the living with mercy and the dead with rest. The boy who'd whispered about breathing in the rafters stared at the farm roof and said nothing to anyone. The town photographer wrapped his plates. 2 were cracked, 1 was fogged. 1 held a child's round eyes like bright coins, proof of disorder that would develop light gray and be labeled artifact. I slid the journal into my coat. It fit against my ribs like a flat, stubborn heart. Behind me, the farm's windows looked blind, all polished with new ash. The stove bench had been wiped to a faint brown ring where a chipped kettle once sat. I pressed my palm there. The wood didn't answer. In the stall, salt had been raked into the dirt until the trail vanished. In the lane, the drainage path along the stone fence had been kicked level. On the attic boards, the cigarette stubs and their little crystals of kitchen salt had been brushed into a pan and thrown out. Clean hands had worked hard. Years from now, the village will tell a softer version. The wind howled. A tragedy befell. No stranger came. Our people are decent. The dead rest. But this morning's gray is the color I will remember. The sheet no one washed. The lamp smoke caught in cloth. The clean-swept yard that smelled faintly of blood under soap. If you've ever watched daylight fall over something that should not be made ordinary, you know the nausea. You know what it costs to stand and keep watching. On a corner of the desk lay the official form, pre-filled by careful script. Farm accident, cause unclear, no evidence of outside entry. Under it, in the same hand that wrote "If I had one more day," a thin correction had been penciled. Insufficient grounds, yet. 3 words that won't stop anything, that might keep one ember warm. When I finally stepped into the lane, a girl carrying bread looked at my sleeve, at the leather corner of the book peeking from my coat, and then away. Her mother tugged her along. The men at the cart shed paused, then turned their backs in unison, as if we were a cold draft. From the eaves of the station, a loose wire ticked the siding. The sound was small, but the rhythm matched a memory. The steady tap of a body shifting quietly on rafters above people who did not know or would not know. That rhythm will outlast the day. It will live in a man who leaves and comes back older. It will live in whoever opens this spine again and finds the apology pressed flat, the page margins salted with ash, the torn corners like teeth. The case died here, true. It died not for lack of light, but from the industry of forgetting. Still, what's buried alive scratches. The ground remembers. Wood remembers. A chipped kettle remembers. A boy's held breath remembers. And paper. Paper is the one thing that can't help betraying the hands that try to clean it. I'll keep the notebook. I'll keep its stains. When the time is right, I'll lift the lid. The village will call it peace. I'll call it waiting.